Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next lecture in the COM 372 edited lecture series, the sort of introduction to Premiere Pro. And unlike with the last four lectures, I'm now in the actual software. I'm not looking at a PowerPoint slide. I'm screen sharing the software itself. And so what we've got here is the timeline that was created as part of the LinkedIn Learning series on Premiere Pro 2020, the resources tab. So you guys all have access to the resources tab in LinkedIn Learning, and you can download this timeline to play with, or you can just get started right in your own film. So I wanted to point out a few things that we haven't really discussed at length yet. You guys will certainly remember that defining vector, the shape of the letter N. You'll remember that the tools are here, that the audio meters are here, and that you should be peaking always somewhere between -12 and -6 decibels. That becomes really apparent when we show films and one film is peaking too low and you can't hear it. One film is peaking too high and the audio becomes distorted, or what's called overmodulated. So it really is vitally important that you pay attention to these meters and then you output your audio in this range, -12 to -6 decibels. And I will do a lecture later in the later in the semester about audio editing using the pen tool and creating these sort of audio edits that you see here, where you raise and lower the volume of the audio and distinguish between audio gain and audio volume. There's a lot to talk about in that regard. But right now I want to just talk about the interface still. What you'll notice in each of these individual boxes is that they've all got a ton of sub-menus available. So let's start here in our very first bin, and we can, looking through this menu, we can see all kinds of different options that are available to us. But I wanted to point out the Effects tab. That is one of the most important tools that you'll use in Premiere Pro. And when you click into the Effects tab, you see that it's got not only a search box, but everything sort of broken up by different types of effects. So I'm a big fan of the video effects. And for example, okay, let's search for black and white here in the effects box. So you type in black, the and character, and every other tool goes away except for this black and white tool. And the way that these effects work is that you select a piece of video or a piece of audio that you want to have the effect on. Let's select this piece of video. If we were to take this black and white tool and drop it there, it turns it black and white. We can also have that tool highlighted and double click, and we'll add that effect as well. So you have two different ways of adding an effect onto a piece of video. Two easy ways, and one is just to either drag it directly over or double click and have it added there. Now, when you do an effect, when you add an effect to a clip, it will show up in the Effect Controls tab in a different box. And so as we're looking at the effects controls for this shot, we see here things like motion, which is, say, the directionality that you take when you're going through a shot, either adding motion to a piece of video or motion to a photograph, which is usually what you'll do it mostly, the Ken Burns effect, where you zoom in on a photograph or you zoom right or left, you track across a photograph. That is controlled here. Opacity will make something invisible from 0 to 100%. Color, there's a color correction on this already that was put on by the LinkedIn Learning editor. And then finally, there's the black and white effect that I added here. That effect can be turned on and off. So I can turn it off and I'm looking at it in color again. I turn it back on. I can also just highlight it, hit delete, and it goes away. Now, as I move through the timeline, the effect, you'll notice, is not changing in this window because I have to have that clip highlighted for that to work. So I highlight this clip, and now I have both what I'm looking at, and here I have the control for it. If I were to accidentally just go down the timeline and start making changes, I'm not actually seeing what I'm working on unless you have both the playhead and the clip highlighted simultaneously and the effects control. So you'll notice that search box is highly useful. There are many effects in here that are really good for first-time filmmakers. Something like the warp stabilizer will remove hand shake on a handheld camera, so that's really useful for a lot of beginning filmmakers. There are also all kinds of effects in here as well that are useful, things like a crossfade, cross dissolve. You can get those either by going to video effects and looking at the menu here for different types of movements, different types of transformations, transitions. So you've got a dissolve, a wipe. The linear wipe is sort of similar to what you saw in the Star Wars, the original Star Wars movie, Episode 4, for example. You also have the option of being in your timeline, and if you right-click on any piece of video, you right-click, it will ask you if you want to apply your default transition. And you can control that default, meaning you can change it for your setup. So I had mentioned in a previous lecture that I like to take my effects tab and move it up here to be with effects controls. I like them together. I like to leave the default transition alone. It's a crossfade over 30 frames, a dissolve where one shot goes down while another shot comes up. A very simple fade between those two shots. Now, if you don't have enough information after your cut, you could have what's called a jump cut, where you're fading down well, and then suddenly it goes to black, or suddenly it goes to a different shot. Like say you're working on a B-roll sequence where you go from one flag shot to another, you might end up with a jump cut in that crossfade where you start off with one shot and halfway through the dissolve, as you're going to zero, we see an internal cut and it's jarring. It looks unprofessional, and it's something that we try to avoid. So when you do see a jump cut like that, when you see frames of video that are not as they should be, you should fix that. Either by changing the length of your transition or by changing the end point, so you're not trying to take information into your movie that is not there, that shouldn't be there. So if I were to click Apply Default Transition, you'll notice that it puts a cross dissolve on there. I can adjust that cross dissolve in multiple different directions, depending on, it's just running so slowly today, depending on how much information I've got, how much extra is hidden in this piece of video. And that cross dissolve, as we can look at here, it's unrendered, but we'll be able to see a dissolve in this shot where it's fading from one to the other. So that is that's some basic information about how to use the effects control, and how to take material directly both into your timeline, and then how to add these effects easily onto your timeline. You can also do an adjustment layer, which many of you guys are probably familiar with from Photoshop. So we could, for example, add a track, a video track at the top of this. Like let's right click and let's add a track of video. We add one track. Now I can take an adjustment layer and I could turn the entire movie black and white with an adjustment layer. I can drag that all the way out. I can go back into effects, search again for black and white, and I've got it highlighted. I double click, and now my entire movie is black and white because that adjustment layer is doing all of that work for me. I can see it in color again just by removing this layer or by hiding this layer. So I'm hiding the layer now, and now everything will be in color again. So again, a really simple way to add effects. A second simple way is by creating an adjustment layer and then putting whatever effect that it is that you want onto your movie in that layer. And it's very similar to Photoshop in the sense that you're doing non-destructive work here. You're not really changing the source material. You're not changing the color of it. you're adjusting it in a way that is very fixable and that I could just always click on that, delete it, and now I'm back to where I started from in the beginning. So again, this is a very simple way to navigate this space. The last thing I want to talk to you about, since I haven't mentioned it before in specific, are these tabs at the top of the edit menu. And these are where, if you go into another subset, it will change your interface to give you the tools related to that topic. So I think all of you should be working for the most part in the editing window, but you could, for example, as your edit progresses, go into the color window and notice that it brings up a significant number of tools in this color palette. So you can do some really simple, easy to use, basic correction. Let's find a clip. We're in the color palette. Let's do some basic correction. I can do all kinds of things. Like I could, for example, redo the white balance. I don't have any white in this shot, so it's not as straightforward, but I could, for example, like I could redo the white balance by clicking on, if I can find her. Sorry, there's such a long delay in this my machine because I'm trying to lecture in real time. Let's say, let's look at his shirt here. So if we notice, his shirt is really kind of reddish here. If I were to highlight this, click, redo the white balance, notice what it does is it changes the color of the entire image, because what you're saying there to the system is, this is what that color white should look like. Clearly, it's not that color. So there must have been a problem with the filter, a problem with the lighting. Something was not set correctly. So we use that tool to adjust that to white, and then everything else adjusts to what they should look like as well. So it's a pretty simple way of making fast fixes in video editing. So that's a very simple introduction to the Premiere Pro interface. Just remember that hidden in all of these spaces are menus that are extremely effective. So I will see you in the next set of lectures.